When Charmaine McGuffey was accused of harassment, the investigation into her wasn't like the others. It produced a 108-page report covering 4 years of her career. Most other investigations by her employer were just 5 pages long, and the court, they had a lot to say about that. Today, we are talking about McGuffey v. Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, a case that's not only about discrimination and retaliation, but also about how the way you investigate an employee can make or break an employer's defense in court. By the end of this video, you'll understand how investigations can be weaponized and used against employees, why poorly handled investigations create serious risk for employers. And if you're an HR professional, I'll share tools you can use to run a structured, fair, and defensible process every time. Hi, I'm Harlow Reed, employment lawyer, HR consultant, and creator of the HR Insider. And on this channel, I do more than share legal opinions. I break down real cases to show how the law might apply to your workplace. Whether you're an employee trying to protect your rights or an employer trying to do things the right way. This is a very complex case today because not only does it focus on an allegation of harassment, it also details how the investigation itself became a central issue, raising questions about fairness, consistency, and bias because of the way the investigation was handled. Oftentimes, for small employers especially, or even less experienced HR professionals, the liability doesn't come from the allegation itself, it comes from mishandling the investigation. This case shows exactly how that can happen, and that's why I cover these kinds of cases. How an employer responds to a harassment claim, it's critical. But what about when they don't know how to respond? Or even what steps they should take? That's where so many get into trouble, and that's why I also created my step-by-step employer guide, the Harassment Investigation Toolkit series. The first 2 guides in the series are already available. Guide 1, Planning the Investigation, and Guide 2, Interviewing the Complainant. Together, these are the first 2 steps you need to begin an effective investigation. You can find both linked below. Okay, let's get into it. The content shared on this channel is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional legal advice. Always consult with a qualified attorney or HR professional for specific guidance tailored to your needs. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Charmaine McGuffey joined the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office in 1983, and over the next 3 decades, she served as the correction officer, trainer, electronic monitoring deputy, and training captain, building a statewide reputation for her work in corrections. And when Jim Neal was elected sheriff in November 2012, he had known McGuffey since they were teenagers. During his transition into office, he brought her onto his planning team. In 2013, as part of a restructuring plan, Jim Neal promoted Charmaine McGuffey to Major of Jail and Court Services, making her the first woman ever to hold the rank of Major in Hamilton County. Her new role combined duties that had previously been handled by 3 male majors. That year, she rehired Heather Dobbins, a former employee, to serve as her administrative assistant, helping McGuffey address compliance problems inside the jail as she stepped into her new role as major. And by 2014, the jail was back in compliance with state standards. Over the next 4 years, McGuffey received letters of appreciation and accolades from both public and private partners. And she was recognized by the Ohio State Sheriff's Association for her leadership in corrections. In her only formal performance review as major, sometime in 2014, Sheriff Neal gave her an A and called her his favorite major. But according to McGuffey, the culture inside the sheriff's office was far less supportive toward women. She said female officers weren't respected, weren't promoted fairly, and were treated like second-class citizens. And when she raised concerns about certain subordinates being disrespectful, her boss Neal told her, "These guys just don't like reporting to a woman." And tensions escalated in 2013 when Sergeant William Rarick transferred into internal affairs. After just 6 hours of on-the-job training, he became the sole internal affairs investigator. Charmaine McGuffey and William Rarick soon clashed over use of force standards in the jail. McGuffey said force was out of control under his watch, while Rarick accused her of interfering with his investigations. By August 2016, things boiled over because McGuffey said two colleagues, Jim Knapp and William Rarick, they invited her to lunch and told her the men who worked for her, they didn't like her style of supervision. They warned her that if she didn't change, they would recommend that her employment be terminated. Charmaine McGuffey immediately met with Sheriff Neal, who told her she was doing a great job and gave her another A on her evaluation. Then, in January 2017, Heather Dobbins, remember Heather? She was hired by Charmaine McGuffey, actually rehired to work as McGuffey's administrative assistant. Well, in December 2016, Heather Dobbins transferred to another division. Just a month later, in January 2017, Dobbins, now McGuffey's former assistant, filed a formal complaint accusing Charmaine McGuffey of bullying, belittling, favoritism, and treating personal friends more favorable than others. And then Internal Affairs opened an investigation that spanned incidents going back to late 2013 and early 2014. That investigation was unusually large, more than 30 interviews, a report over 100 pages long. And just for context, other investigations in the office were typically just a few interviews and reports of about 5 pages. And by early 2017, Internal Affairs recommended McGuffey's termination. Over 30 deputies were interviewed during the investigation, and even though he hadn't verified the statements himself, Sheriff Neal later justified his decision to terminate Charmaine McGuffey by saying 31 deputies can't all be lying. And on February 24th, 2017, he offered McGuffey a choice. He said, accept a demotion to a civilian position as jail programming coordinator or be terminated. Charmaine McGuffey refused the demotion, and she was terminated. Her replacement was a heterosexual male. In May 2018, McGuffey filed a federal lawsuit alleging sex discrimination, sexual orientation discrimination, and retaliation under Title VII and Ohio state law. She also claimed she was fired in violation of public policy for objecting to Internal Affairs' refusal to discipline officers in excessive force cases. On July 29, 2020, Judge Susan Dlott denied the sheriff's office motion for summary judgment, finding obvious differences between the investigation into McGuffey and others and ruling that a jury should decide the case. Now, we don't know the full terms of how the case was resolved. Those details were not made public, but what we do know is that on January 21st, 2021, the court awarded McGuffey almost $250,000 in attorney's fees and nearly $23,000 in costs. And that confirms she prevailed in her case. And it also underscores just how high the stakes can be when investigations aren't handled fairly. Because remember, this outcome, it wasn't about the original allegation made by Heather Dobbins, her administrative assistant. The money awarded in this case wasn't tied to whether that complaint was true or false. It was about something bigger, how the investigation itself was handled, and that's where the employer went wrong. I can't help but think about the relationship between Charmaine McGuffey and Sheriff Jim Neal. They'd known each other since high school. And when he was elected sheriff, he brought her in because he trusted her, because he needed someone he knew could clean up the jail and bring it back into compliance. And she did exactly that. But when the time came for him to stand up for her, he didn't. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe it would have meant taking on too much or exposing too much corruption. But in the end, he had already gotten what he needed from her. The jail fixed in compliance. So by the time this all happened, it may have been easier to discard her, to let her go. But that choice, that lack of character, it didn't just cost McGuffey. It resulted in a botched investigation that reflected poorly on him, on the sheriff's office, and ultimately on the state of Ohio itself. Not to mention it destroyed a friendship that had lasted decades. Friendships like that don't come around every day. That's how it goes sometimes. People would rather see everything collapse than be a part of real change. And then there's Heather Dobbins, the assistant McGuffey herself rehired. She's the one who instigated the complaint, accusing McGuffey of the very things that McGuffey had been urging internal affairs to avoid: bullying and excessive force. It's a fascinating and complex story, but at the end of it all, here's the lesson. When an allegation about workplace conduct requires an investigation, the process has to be fair, impartial, and thorough. And any failure in that process will almost certainly taint the results and influence a judge or jury to side against the employer. Thanks for watching today. I'll see you in the next video.